Hello everyone, how is everyone doing? Okay, so I know it's after lunch. I'll try to keep it interactive. All right, let me know if it's going to become too much interactive. All right, so today I will present a case study on what works and what doesn't work in UX personalization. Now, the study that I'm presenting is actually based on production data that we collected from the companies that we partner with, anonymized. And it shows what happens when you actually have personalizations applied to your UI. And we try to debunk some of the myths that people apply just because everyone else is doing that. But we also try to understand if there is a rationale behind some of the actions that are actually taken. That's why things that work and things that don't actually seem to work. The KPIs that we use in this study are mostly related to user engagement. So at the end of the day, how many click through on how many times you show a poster, a movie, a TV series, and how many times a user actually clicked on it and watched it, which is probably the easiest engagement KPI that we can collect. We call that effectiveness. You show something to a user in your UI, do they actually click on it? Do they actually watch it? Now, a couple of words about ContentWise for those of you who are not familiar. I do see a few familiar faces, and also about myself. ContentWise, we provide a UX personalization software which allows end-to-end personalization for OTT players. So what we do is we actually apply machine learning, and we apply diligence in creating superpowers for editors. So what we do want to do is work with editors to allow them to quickly change the experience that their users are actually having on your system. As for myself, Renato Bonomini, as you can clearly hear from my thick Boston accent, I actually relocated from Boston a month ago, right before the winter, right? And that was a clever choice. After 5 winters in Boston, I have to admit that I love Boston, but I've had enough. Originally from Italy, well, my name probably gave it out. And I've been with the company for slightly more than 10 years in various positions. And in the last couple of years, I've actually been working for ContentWise specifically, which is one of the companies in the group. And I'm responsible for the people that are out there on the field trying to make this work. It is tough. It is tough to actually work in this space because every company that we partner with has their own unique challenges, their own unique personalized challenges. That's the space we work in. In my free time, if you happen to be around here now, you might see me actually riding my Ducati around and probably passing you out on the highway. So don't run over me. All right, let's get a little bit more into the juice, just to set the level set of the context. So the vision that we have as a company is that we want to take what comes out of your human ingenuity, so the fact that you have a service, and this service is essentially your content. That's your unique, your peculiar proposition that you give to your users. I think we heard yesterday there are 200 OTT services out there. You have to differentiate. You have to be unique. So what we want to do is we want to take your ingenuity and we want to apply that to personalization that works for 1 million users, 100,000 users. Every user gets a personalized experience. Now, you can do that on a one-to-one base. So that's where we want to apply machine speed. Obviously, yes, there is machine learning behind it. Who doesn't say that there's some machine learning behind it? Well, we were doing machine learning 10 years ago when we started, and that's still what we do largely. But there is also a set of additional capabilities that are really geared towards helping editors making their job easier. Now, that being the vision, let's try to understand what actually happens when you try to make this happen, when the rubber meets the road, and you realize that things are not that easy. So we start from a very much likely challenge you've seen. The current TV experience is essentially broken. What does it mean by broken? What we mean is that if you are an operator, you have a set of challenges that you're probably right now looking at. Repetitive task. Your editors are going into your UI and changing what's available every day, every hour, changing live content, promoting live content, promoting VOD content. So this is repetitive task going on and on, over and over. Decisions on what is popular, what should be recommended, what should be displayed is often driven by business or by people that have, the largest, the highest paid person in the room, very often the hippo. So what we would want to make this is actually data-driven. But another peculiar aspect is that we work with a lot of companies that they told us very clearly that every time they want to change the user experience, great, yes, we'll get a developer to change the UI. And that's really expensive, and it takes an enormous amount of time. So those are the pains that the operators that we are actually collecting and they're telling us. On the other side, as a consumer, and out of the 200 OTT apps that you can download, I probably have like 150 on my phone. And I do routinely go out and try to test them myself, to put myself in the shoes of what actually users are doing. And what you see is that too often, the experience is the same for everyone. You open up the app, and it's just the same app that everyone gets. Same content, but also same look and feel, same experience. It takes an enormous amount of time to find content. Now, by a raise of hands, how many of you have ever been in a situation where you're watching TV, you are on your couch, browsing through the EPG, and after an hour you say, there's nothing on TV tonight? That happens all the time, right? You spend an hour browsing the EPG, to the point that browsing the EPG becomes your habit. It's not actually watching TV. Okay, what's on TV? Yeah, don't like this, and you spend an hour doing that. There's way too much content for someone to go and search for it actively. So we want really to make it easier for them to find it. Another problem which is coming up recently is also the limited amount of space that is available on some devices. If you have a web app, it behaves very differently from having an Apple TV app. Behaves very differently from having an iPhone app. Very much different experience. So let's get down more in the details of this study. And where we started from is trying to understand where you have Alex, our male persona in this case, that is connecting using a phone, or Alex is connecting through, for example, through a smart TV. And Alex gets a certain type of UI with certain boxes, certain layout, so he gets one experience. What happens right now is that when Karen connects with the same device, she gets the same experience. And when she connects with the same device, she gets the same experience. So multi-screen doesn't mean that you simply have to adapt your content to different devices, which is what happens already, and that's fine. But the different people are getting the same exact experience, and that really does not work out that well. Because, for example, in this case, you might have Alex, our persona here, who is leaning forward and actively searching for content. And on the other side, you might have Karen leaning backward and just sitting down and waiting to receive what's best, what should I be watching. Very different approaches on how they actually do. And we saw clearly that this is largely based on demographics. So just trying to match everyone's taste to the same approach simply does not work. Let's get into the juice of what we try to understand out of the data that we collected. So what are actually the big questions that we tried to understand in this case? Just to anticipate, for example, does changing the UI changes how people actually consume data? Is the same content performing better on a different device, on a different UI? That's one of the questions. Can we, for example, use machine learning, which everyone now is trying to do, machine learning for everything? Can we actually use it for something useful, such as understanding which users might like a personalized experience and which users might not like? Or, for example, understanding the order of carousels. Is that relevant for the effectiveness of content? So we listed out these 5 questions. And let's look at the first one. Some of these are things that you might already have an answer for. And you might have read around, or you might just word of mouth or cargo cult. You might, yes, that's how we know it is. So what we set as a goal for this study was, let's understand if what everyone is doing, what everyone thinks, is actually what's happening out of real data that we collect on an existing live system. The first one is an easy question that everyone probably has an answer for. Is users' behavior different on different devices? No, I don't want, okay, all right, we'll take a look. We'll get there, but I would like you to take a second and think about what you would answer on this one. We'll go through the questions and then we'll see the details and the data behind each question. The second one is, does time of the day matter? And before you think of the answer, we're talking about OTT apps. Content is always available at any point in time. Time does not matter. Content is always there. It's not like it's 9 p.m. Thursday and you know you're going to watch Shonda Rhimes content on ABC because it's Thursday night, 9 p.m. That's what my wife makes me watch every Thursday night. So it's not like it's time-bound. So it's an OTT app. All content is always available. So does time of the day really matter? Think about it. We'll take a look at the data. Are position and content consumption related? So as you can see here, for example, in a traditional grid-like UI, which is a simplified view of how a UI is actually made, it works. Positioning, horizontal or vertical, has a factor. So what is the factor? So we took a look at analyzing the data, what comes out of the data in terms of consumption. The next question, now we do work in the personalization space, recommendations, so we always want to make sure that there is some recommended content, that there's some machine learning acting behind the scenes. And whatever happens, every time we work with our partners, we have the team editors that when we enter the room, they look at us, oh, here comes who's going to steal our job. Well, that's not really what we want to do. What we really want to do is to make sure that we use the right techniques and we use the editorial ingenuity to actually make the content shine and make the content available to everyone. So one of the questions was, how does a user perceive personalization? Should we truly push so much to use the best algorithm in the world, or what's recent is just going to do the cut, or what's popular, it's just going to be enough? So what we did is we tested a lot of those and came out with some interesting information there. Last question, the hero banner. How many of you are using a hero banner? And how many of you are like, oh, we have to have a hero banner. Unless we have a hero banner, we're not going to make it. So we tested the assumption that the hero banner is the best way to showcase content. That's a strong assumption. So we put it to test to make sure that the fact that a hero banner takes an enormous amount of space in UI is actually justified, because it does. OK, now, a little bit on how we perform the analysis to understand some of the graphs that I'm going to show you. Later on, there will be a link to a white paper which has more information and a write-up of all of this information if you want to download and read it. So first of all, the kind of services that we use to collect the data all had these traits in common. So we look for services among the partners we work with that had these things. The first one is very dynamic storefronts. As in this case, for example, you can see from one day to another, carousels are actually shifting. So they're moving from one place to another. Some of this is actually based on machine learning. Some of these was simply based on editorial choices. Some of these weren't even randomized. But the common trait between all services is that carousels were quickly changing from day-to-day positions so that we can understand, is carousel of type A better suited for the top row, the bottom row, the second row, the third row? That was a very helpful understanding. So very dynamic storefronts. The second hypothesis that we used to select data was that it had to be a multi-screen service, because we wanted to understand whether different devices are actually coming to different conclusions. So in this case, we look at smart TV, web portal, mobile devices, which are the most common choices. And most operators actually have apps that are running all three of them. Now, multi-screen might mean that people behave differently. So behavior is driven by the UI. So one assumption that we took, which was strong, is that the UI, even if multi-screen, was consistent. So that the factor or the device factor was not going to influence sharply how users actually use the system. This was a tricky one. But think of colors, think of type of posters, think of how the page is laid out. It had to be consistent, not a completely different approach. Another assumption that we had to take, and we verified that the data actually showed, is that the consumption was consistent between the different devices. And we wanted to compare different devices. So we had to make sure that we were not comparing, oh, the hero banner works great on smart TV because that's what people actually use. They don't use the other ones. So we wanted to make sure that they had a very similar consumption model, not just in terms of value, but also in terms of day of the week and hour of the day. That was important. Functionally speaking, another assumption of the data that we used to analyze is that all of these services had deep storefronts. So very long pages with a lot of items so that people could scroll vertically and scroll horizontally. There is a tendency recently to start increasing the number of items that are available in a carousel. Is that actually proving to be of any usefulness? We'll take a look at a couple of graphs that question that choice, but also the horizontal number of carousels. Now, people like to scroll, but is scrolling actually good? We'll take a look at some of the data indeed. The most important one is that in order to understand whether personalization truly works, or sometimes all you want is a cherry-pick list from your editors that know best your content, maybe that actually works best. Or maybe what's popular actually works great. We do have a company we work with that they have only about 150 TV series. They don't have a huge amount of content. And of those, 5 or 6 are popular. The other ones are really not that popular. So their best use case is what's popular. Every other use case is not that appealing. So in this case, what we wanted to do is to make sure that we were using all of the common mainstream use cases, such as, for example, most viewed, new releases, the traditional topics for you. That's the nomenclature that we recommend using, topics for you, recommended. A lot of people starting to get that recommended sounds weird. Dynamic categories, which are clustering of items that belong to the same type, continue watching, or editorial list, which is where editors actually recommend the content, which they might be static. The content list created by editors might be simply a static list in the order they wish, or it can be editorial content sorted by the user preference. And finally, let's get to some of the results. I'll be spending a little bit of time on a couple of important ones and then quickly go over the other ones so that if you have any question about a specific one, we can talk about it as soon as we're done. All right? Okay. All right, heat maps. How many are now? Gosh, it's after lunch and you're showing me a heat map. I know, let's spend a few minutes understanding what the heat map is about. I'm going to show you a few of them, but they are important to understand the outcome of this analysis, which obviously comes out of our R&D department. I used to do a lot of these too. So what we have here, conversion rate, normalized between devices. So you will see blue, things that are not getting a lot of clicks, not a lot of views. Red, things that are really hot, things that people are actually clicking on. The volume will be different, but it will be red is good, blue is bad. And then here we have the traditional grid system, the one that I was showing you, red boxes before, simply shown as one item in a carousel as being a box. So the top row right there, that's the first carousel in your page. And the first column is the first item. So the more you scroll down, you scroll vertically in the page. On the right, you will find items that, in order to see them, you have to scroll right. Whenever you see white spaces here, there are a couple of places. In this example right here, the white space here is simply because the first top carousel right there is a hero banner, which only has 6 items. So the rest is simply white. We don't have data. And in other cases, this carousel is outside of our control. We did not have data. It was like an externally inserted carousel for which we could not measure effectiveness. So once again, here, carousel we don't have data for. And here, simply a carousel which is shorter than the others, like the hero banner. So what do we see in this case? This is the web portal. So something that your users actually connect and go to web and check. We can already see a couple of things. First of all, web, carousels that are on top are getting most of the hits. Okay, that was kind of like, okay, well, nothing really new, but still, we're seeing the data. And actually, if you look at the amount of red here, the second carousel, not the hero banner, is taking a lot of the click-through. So most of the content is actually being watched through the second carousel, and not the first one, the hero banner, which takes up a lot of space. Then scrolling down, we can clearly see, if you take a look at the shades here, that there is a cluster here, and a little bit going on the right, but most of the content is being consumed on the top left, which is something that, if you thought about it, you probably knew already. People are not scrolling right, and they're not scrolling down. They're simply not. They're actually staying there. Remember that the use cases over time are switching positions, so we're taking out the fact that a use case works better than the others. So we're evening that out. This is a view over time. It's the average of pages that have changed over time, so use case is not relevant here, but the position is relevant. Is a carousel in position number 1 doing better than a carousel in position 20-something? And clearly, the carousels that are in top positions are really users are only looking here. They're not clicking anywhere else. Content here, it's like it doesn't exist. It's not even there. And this is the web portal. Now, let's take a look at another device. So the first question was, is users' behavior different from device to device? So now we're looking at a mobile device. It's hard to tell the difference. And if you think of it, a web portal versus a mobile app, they are completely different. The UI is, first of all, the web portal is huge. You have at least HD sides, and people can scroll easily, their mouse. An app on your phone has a very limited amount of space. It's easier to swipe, but it's very limited amount of space. Very often, a hero banner on a mobile app takes half of the space of the screen. Nonetheless, the behavior of users is actually almost the same. So they're only clicking on the top left part. That's where the views are coming from. That's the content which is actually being watched. The content is being presented on the top left. People are rarely scrolling down, and for sure they're not scrolling right. That's whenever I get a request from editorial teams, we want to create a carousel of 100 items. So you believe that people are going to swipe for 100 items to the right? That's a lot. And this actually shows that content on the right is likely never going to be watched in any case. So keep your carousel short. And the interesting result here is that even if you think that user behavior is different from device to device, in this case, very different devices, strikingly, they're actually behaving in a very similar way. Now, I mentioned that there were 3 devices. The last one, the smart TV. This was a little bit of a surprise because we looked at 2 devices which were very different, and we found similar patterns. Okay, users always behave the same way, which is different from what we thought. Actually, smart TV had a very different approach. What this graph shows, once again, remember that red means that people that click here a lot, they watch a lot of content from that area. Going down is scrolling down, and going to the right is swapping to the right. So what happens here is that, as you can see, the amount of content being watched on the smart TV app is actually pretty nicely, evenly distributed across all of the carousels, which means that people are actually scrolling. Maybe it's the remote control. Maybe it's the app. Maybe it's the Apple TV remote control. But simply they are scrolling, and they are clicking more and consuming more content, which is actually distributed evenly horizontally, vertically. But horizontally, you see, this is consistent between all devices. There comes a certain point after a number of items, the carousel is no longer interesting. And remember, the use cases here are irrelevant. This is not function of the use cases. So one of these could be new releases, and these are all new releases. All right. Analyzing this in a little bit more detail and with some zoom, as you can see here, these are much more even. But something that I wanted to showcase is that our dear hero banner, I guess you start getting the feeling that I'm not a huge fan of the hero banner. Okay, no hits. It's like it's not even useful to have a hero banner there. It's not even clicked. So in this case, we do not have control over the first row, which is not a hero banner, but the hero banner is right here. It doesn't really get that much views. So in the case of the smart TV, it's not even working. It's even worse than the other ones. So think of your answer to the first question, which was, is users' behavior different on different devices? Now, the conclusion that we came is that it depends. So while in some cases, this is actually carried over across devices, mobile versus web portal, in some other ones, like in smart TV, it does differ significantly, which at the end of the day suggests that you should really look at your data and collect. And this is a good example of how you can actually understand different devices, how they are behaving. The collection that we use here is user engagement, once again. So if a user was shown an item here, how many times did the user actually click on that specific grid layout, horizontal and vertical position? We normalize that information on the page as to have item positions that were cold, positions that did not create conversion rate for items, versus positions that converted items very nicely. And remember that the content and the use cases changed, so this is irrelevant of the use case and the content. So this is almost purely position-based. All right, next question. Does time of the day matter? Now, I think someone mentioned yesterday that now with OTT, all content is always available, so why should we even bother about time of the day? What we did find out that clearly time of the day does matter a lot. So what we have here, as you can see for different devices, our smart TV, our web portal, our mobile app, a first result that we saw is that users are actually using devices from a volume perspective pretty much consistently. So these curves, these are normalized, they follow each other. So the amount of users in relationship that you're going to have in one infrastructure and the other is pretty much the same, which is good. The other one is that weekday versus weekend is also very consistent. So essentially, the device does not really matter on when users are actually watching content, but the time of the day does matter, and a lot, especially if you compare weekend and weekday, and also top peak hour of the day. These are very similar to what you would see in broadcasting. It's really not much different than the amount of users, which means that even if your content is always available, your users could connect any time of the day to watch it. They're still going to connect at the same hours that they used to. So when it's 9 p.m., you want to show content which is good for 9 p.m. And when it's morning, you want to show content which is good for morning. So for example, what I would like to suggest, that it's an approach that we often find very effective, is that profile the hours of the day. So change your UI so that in the morning it behaves in a certain way, noon it behaves in a different way, afternoon, evening, late night. Change the UI so that it changes over time during the day. So to the second question, does time of the day matter? It still does. Even if the OTT, everything is always available, that does not matter. Users are actually consuming different content, and they are consuming with the same pattern that we see in broadcasting. Next question is about UI position. Now, we saw earlier that the graphs we were looking at, the Heatmaps, did not consider the use case because these were switching very quickly. So we wanted to understand, is a use case going to perform, by a use case I mean, for example, a carousel of new releases or an editorial carousel, or as in this graph right here, a carousel that shows premium content or a carousel that shows new releases. So those are what we call use cases, how a carousel behaves. What is the criteria on how you populate content in a carousel? That's what we call a use case. Here we're comparing two use cases, new releases, content which has been recently made available, and the premium content, which are very popular use cases that show premium content. So they usually are displayed in the top carousels, which are the better ones, at least from what we've seen, usually they are the ones driving more conversions. So what usually happens is the editors, oh, my premium content is going to go in my best carousels, the one that get me more conversions. Counterintuitive. We'll take a look in a couple of minutes whether that's actually a good approach or not. What we did is, let's switch and let's look over time. So this is over several weeks. Whether switching new releases from third row to row number 1 and switching it with premium content, so we're switching back and forth, the two, and understanding, do they get the same amount of conversions? We saw that position matters, but do use cases actually matter? And reality is that position does matter, as we saw earlier, but also the use case, where it is, matters. Because if we switch new releases from the third row to the first one, which is usually driving more conversions, it has a moderate gain. But if we move premium content from the first row to the third row, it loses a lot. It loses much more than what new release is actually doing. So it's not just a combination of position, but also use cases. So the same use case in a different position will behave differently, which makes it much more complex. It's an unfortunate and difficult condition to handle, but it is interesting because you have to account for it. Fourth question, even more graphs. There are going to be two types here. We're going to focus on a couple of use cases. So the fourth question is, how is personalization perceived by the user? So what we try to analyze here is, whenever I show what's popular, new releases, personalized, which ones are actually attracting the most the user interest? One of the comments that we often hear from editors, which we love, but that love is not given back often, is that, oh, you come in with a recommender engine and you're going to cannibalize my editorial list. All the content is going to be taken upon by machine learning. So what we wanted to understand here is that that actually happens or not. So the first graph here shows you how much space is given to either machine learning-based carousels, carousels which are built for a user by machine learning techniques, or carousels that are simply based on editorial choices. As you can see here, over time, this is pretty constant. Remember that these services are changing every day. Every day, the UI is completely different. Carousels are shifted around. Use cases have changed. But overall, over time, the amount of space that we are giving to personalize, meaning machine learning-based, versus editorial, is actually pretty much the same. And it's a lot of space. 75% of the space is actually allocated to personalized content. We want editors to curate editorial carousels. We don't want to spend them 24 hours a day doing that. So the idea is that fill up a few carousels, which are really the premium ones and the good ones, and the rest is filled up automatically by machine. You don't have to do that. That's why 75% of the content here is actually populated automatically by machine. So once again, the goal here is to understand whether by doing this, we are taking away the good of the work that the editors are doing, which means cannibalizing their work, which is what they always complain about. Oh, you're taking away precious real estate space from my UI. I need to show my editorial list. So first of all, we kept it constant over time. And the dimension over time is going to be significant in this picture, where it looks similar, but what we're doing is, previous one was how much space was used in the UI by a certain type of generation of carousels, machine learning based versus editorial choices. This is how conversion rates actually work. What we can do is that the first cluster here, the light orange, and the light blue here, the second one, these are editorial carousels, and these are machine learning-based carousels, the most important ones. As you can see here, what we notice is that even if over time they use the same amount of space, pretty much it's the same space, about 10% editorial carousels and a lot more personalized carousels. What we do see, I think I played enough with my cat, so my remote control There you go. Okay. So what's happening is that the amount of conversions given by personalized responses and editorialists, they're flipping back and forth. So one day, editorial choices are doing most of the conversions or much more conversions than usual, and the personalized ones are actually decreasing. And another day, the editorial ones are not doing well, but then the personalized are doing well. The way we interpreted this is that at the end of the day, editorial recommendations and personalized machine learning based are actually working together. There is a synergy here because when the editorial ones are not working well, customers are clicking on the personalized ones. But when the editorials are working well, it is actually the personalized ones that are not working that well. So they're kind of like balancing each other, working in synergy. So while we are taking a large fraction of the UI screen, we're not actually cannibalizing the editorial choices. And they're actually playing nicely with each other. The rest of the use cases, as you can see, it's kind of constant over time. These two ones, the light blue and light orange, they are flipping back on each other. When one works well, the other one does not, and they actually help each other. They work in synergy, as we say. Last question. Does the presentation style affect conversions? Here we are at the moment of truth of one of the myths. Is the hero banner a good thing? Let's take a look at this one. This is the conversion rate of the hero banner, only 6 spots. But from a UI perspective, it takes up usually 20, 25% of your UI. You think usually the hero banner is a very large banner on top, which keeps revolving by itself, uses up a lot of space. So the conversion rate in the case of the web app, actually the second carousel is doing much better than the hero banner. But if we look at the overall conversion rate, the hero banner is using 20% of your home screen, of your storefront. Look at the conversion rates. It's like minimal. So this shows that users are actually not clicking on a hero banner. When they are clicking is because it's so big and it's the first carousel that there's no other choice. It's like, okay, I'm just going to click here. So the way we interpret this is that we saw earlier that position makes a difference. If you position a carousel in carousel number 1, carousel number 2, it does make a difference. Use cases, on the other side, are behaving a little bit differently on where you position them. So what we believe is the case is that, yes, everyone knows that position is important. Top left has been for a long time a staple of being the most important location for displaying content because it's up there, it's available right away. So what happens is that that's the most important one. I'm just going to put a hero banner there. So what we see is that hero banner gets on top. It gets most of the conversions because it's in the most important position. Oh, it works extremely well. We're getting a lot of hits from a volume perspective. But in terms of efficiency, it is actually not. Because if you put another carousel in the same position, it would behave much better. But simply because we think that hero banner is a great way for people to click on it, it's very visible, it's very large, they must be clicking on it, there's no other chance, it's a mousetrap, you can't go anywhere but a hero banner, then all the clicks happen there, but it's actually not the one that works best. Well, where we do find this is actually in churn, because people abandon. They simply don't click there, and that information is not here. If you only look at effectiveness, click-through conversion rates, you're not actually finding which people are actually abandoning. So what we believe is that instead of simply saying, we will put our most important content in the most important position, a better way will be to actually apply machine learning and break the loop of forcing that you want the hero banner to be working well, so you put it in the best position, so it works better, so you justify that it works well, so you put it in the best position, so you keep it in the best position. So that loop has to be broken. And the way that we found this analysis is actually that if you start looking at the data behind the conversions rates, you start breaking some of these assumptions. All right, so thank you very much. I know that after lunch, a lot of these heat maps and data, it's been tough. If you haven't had enough, you can go up on our website, the ContentWise website, and there are similar case studies on different topics. For example, how to evaluate different recommendation techniques, or what metrics you should be using to actually understand the quality. Or for example, solving specific problems like cold start. A user that starts using a service, has no history, no profile, what do we start showing? And finally, it is time to take out your phone and don't feel guilt about doing whatever you were doing on your phone and pretending you're taking a picture of the QR. And if you want to download the white paper, that's actually the URL where you can download it. There's more explanation. The same 5 questions that you saw earlier, but there is more description about them and some little information, also numbers behind the study itself. And if you want a picture with me as well. I was telling Karen, my colleague, that the only picture that I have where I'm smiling is the one where I have Wi-Fi antennas. All right. Now time for Q&A. Yes?
When you were talking about 75% of the screen was machine, only 25% was editorial.
Yes.
Conversions. Did you, that they're working in harmony? That's nice that they're working in harmony, but do you have anything that shows, how much, the effective drop-off point of, is it 25%, 30, 40, 50? Did you try different?
No. No. This. Good question. No, I don't believe we had numbers. This was more based on let's set a strategy and stick to it because we want to have repeatable data, but we did not find the sweet spot. By the way, actually, that triggers another consideration is that that 75% is actually, so editorial, pure editorial, we consider a carousel in this study where the order and the items are decided by editors, and it's the same for everyone, according to your entitlements. So you see content which you're entitled for, but the content you see and the order you see those titles is the same for everyone. That's what we call not machine learning, because someone decides it's going to be the same for everyone. Hero Banner applies the same because it's a same editorial set of choices simply displayed in a different UI widget. So it's the same approach, same content for everyone. New releases is also what we call not personalized because it's new releases. It's going to be new releases for everyone. Unless you watch it, we take out content which you watched. Unless you watch it, it's going to be the same new releases for everyone. So personalized is easy to understand, but there is another part here, which is we call personalized plus editorial. The best synergy that we found, one of my favorite use cases that we apply is that, dear editor, I love the fact you know your content extremely well because it's your content, your service, you know extremely well. There's no one in the world and blah, blah, blah. Just make them happy. Show some love. That is the content that they decide they want to publish. But the order is actually decided by machine. So that if you get 10 choices of editorial cherry picks, the order of those 10 choices is actually decided by a machine who looks at your history, looks at your preferences, looks at your searches, and understand, yes, there are 10 choices, but number 1 should be this one for you, and number 1 should be a different one for Karen, and Bill should have a different number 1. So the order is actually based on the likelihood you would enjoy that content. It's still a static set of options, but we order them by the likelihood you might enjoy them. We call that personalized. It's still editorial, but it's personalized. We consider that a machine learning base, even if the source of the list comes from an editorial list.
On the multiple device scenario, were you able to find out about multi-user, multi-viewer?
So these users are actually, we do identify users across devices with the same ID. This is one of the assumptions that we always set in practice, that users, no matter where they are connecting from, it's always the same user. So we did not look at a cluster of users and understand this is the aggregate. But we do know users and the history of a user. For example, if you watch that content on smart TV, that's going to influence web portal, it's going to influence the recommendations and the personalizations on the mobile too. So your history is propagated, but we look at the aggregate in this case.
Yeah, I just think that maybe, on the larger screen, people are more likely to have other people with them, and they're more likely to scroll down something they like.
Yeah, that is actually an active study that we're doing, which is very often when you are in front of a larger screen, you're not by yourself. So there comes a moment where it's either embarrassing, oh, why you're getting those recommendations, or you have to give up on, okay, it's Thursday night, we look at Shonda Rhimes, fine. So there's a whole section in academia which talks about recommender engines on group recommendations, where you take your profile, my profile, we are together, what joint personalization should we get at the same time? In general, we do try to make our partners identify who's in front of the screen as much as possible. Sometimes with large TV set-top boxes, it's very difficult. Yes, you have profiles, but users don't click on them. So that's why also looking at the time of the day, as in here, what we do often to counteract the fact that you cannot uniquely identify who's in front of a TV is that we split it by time of the day. So we assume that morning is a set of people, children, afternoon someone else, and evening someone else too. So that's one way to avoid the problem of not being sure who is in front of the TV so that the profile gets messed up. Never lend your Netflix account to someone else and then complain about, I don't like Netflix recommendations. That's what happens.
Have you noticed whether users behave the same when there are different business models?
Oh, yes, absolutely. AVOD, SVOD, those two in particular behave very differently. Traditionally, we work primarily with subscription-based services. Recently, we started working with AVOD services, and it's much more difficult. The abandonment rate is much higher. Subscription VOD services, you could tie into a long history. The user was consistent over time. You could use 3 months, 6 months of history. AVOD, we are actually turning into session-based personalization. So no more the history you have done in the last 3 months matters, but what you're doing right now, where you're clicking, is going to influence the next page and the next page. This session-based, they call it session-based recommendations, are much more similar to what music is doing. You're listening to this song, you're going to get the next song. But what you listened to 6 months ago doesn't really matter. So it's a different approach that we have to take because it's clear that with AVOD, the techniques which we applied, this, by the way, were all SVOD services. AVOD really deserves a different approach, a much more dynamic, much more changing, and often the IDs are temporary. And the next time the user comes in, it has a different ID. So there you go. Your whole idea is, well, we'll keep 6 months of history. You're lucky if you're going to get 2 sessions of history. So yes, they should behave differently. Also, AVOD, there was an additional problem that we found. We have this concept of business rules that we apply to whenever we create a UI, which is how the operator can tweak and influence the content which is being displayed. For example, show only premium content here, or don't show premium content here, or show kids content in this carousel. These are simple business rules, or more advanced business rules such as in a carousel, I want to show up to 50% of the content of the same genre. These are rules that you can set in the machine learning techniques that allow you to control how content is generated. One interesting rule that came out in AVOD is that we kept recommending premium content. We were happy about it because usually the SVOD companies are really happy when recommendations are premium content because they get more money. So one of the common business rules is that I want to make sure that the first carousel, the first element of a carousel, which we saw is the most important one usually, is premium content. If I have 5 choices and I make sure that the one that makes me more money is in the first position, I'm going to get more revenue. I mean, that's pretty clear. SVOD. AVOD, we applied the same techniques. The result was similar. So we always had premium content in the first item. We saw click rate going down because people had to register, and they would not register. And the operators couldn't care less about people registering. All they wanted was to display content and show advertisement. So we applied the opposite rule, which is always make sure that the first item is never an item which requires registration or it's a premium content. Always show something which is free. So first few elements, always free content. And then clearly increase the number of ads views, which made the operator happy. So there are surely different approaches. And AVOD is coming into this place. Yes. Good question. Thank you. All right. Sure. The white paper that I listed actually has the same content. So my recommendation is actually to download the white paper, which is, what is the QR code? It's up on our website. If you take a screenshot with your phone, it will open up Safari if it's an iPhone, and it will get you to the page. That white paper has the same set of information and graphs that I showed you today. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate the early afternoon meetings.